I think the most toxic myth is that you need to be doing everything all at once. Just because all of the platforms are out there doesn't mean you need to be on every single one. And I am a firm believer that you're better off leveraging fewer of them in a better, stronger, more strategic way than
Hmm.
just lightly touching every single one of them. Because it's not going to be helpful if people can find you everywhere, but can't understand anything about the value you're trying to provide.
The Blowing Up Brands podcast. It's a running conversation covering brand strategy, demand gen, DEI, unconventional ideas, and unforgettable stories with a whole range of experts, influencers, and other interesting and entertaining characters. Enjoy.
Hey, Nicole, how's it going?
Hey, Exene, it's going great. How about you?
Pretty good, pretty good. I am beholding sunshine, so the temperature is creeping up, and I'm getting a springy kind of vibe today. So I like that.
Yeah, I mean, as sentient houseplants, we all definitely need sunlight and more of it. So,
Yes. And I like the open window version, not the I have to keep my windows closed, but there is still sun coming in and warming me version.
Mm.
So yeah, pleasantries in Buffalo, New York today. Thanks for coming on because I know that you did technically have a choice in the matter, and this is not a hostage situation that we force on employees at Renoun. So I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me because you also had your choice of guests, and I appreciate that you're interested in my input.
I do. All the guests in the world. Why don't you give your elevator pitch of yourself? Introduce yourself to viewers and listeners.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'm Nicole. I'm a Scorpio. No. I'm the senior brand manager at Renoun Creative, and my role is actually a pretty interesting hybrid between strategy, what might otherwise be called account management, and project management. So
Mhm.
I work with our clients to set and define strategy. I then help come up with ways that we're going to use that strategy to help spread their message. And then I oversee the work actually being done and make sure that it's implemented and done in a way that well represents the brand.
So nothing much, right? Like
Yeah, no, it's very chill.
just kind of chilling, overseeing some things. Excellent. So yeah, and I think that part of the reason, obviously, that I wanted you to be on the pod is while there's certain things we talk about on the pod, like I am sometimes personally removed somewhat from the implementation of such ideas and lofty concepts and hot takes. And I thought, somebody who actually is working more directly now with clients and actually it looks like there's a dog butt. Um, Working with our clients to actually implement the strategies we're talking about would be a useful perspective, and make it seem, if we level it out, make it seem less like a constant pitch for strategy, which is the problem with marketing, right? We're all marketing something, and so all we all know that producing value, providing people valuable inputs is also a technique that generate leads. And so, but I think that there is something that clients have interest in besides just the concepts, since most clients don't have a lot of time or wherewithal to spin around in concepts and kind of like work in strategy and rethink those things and implement them themselves. That's why they come to us, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I guess, so I think one thing I'm kind of curious is to your perspective on when someone approaches us, starts a conversation about wanting help of some kind, right? Like something's off, we want to do better, kind of generalized help. Like how, when you're looking at the situation and if you're in, the discovery meeting, whatever it might be, what are you thinking as far as how to tell, does somebody need like big help? Like do they need to actually start rethinking? This is where I always go. What if we rethought this from the ground up? Which doesn't mean you change everything, right? You consider everything, but maybe it does mean you change quite a bit. Or more of a, let's just kind of try to update your tactics a little bit. Maybe something's out of date or something's 3 years old and it stopped working, or a pure like forget all that and let's just optimize. Let's find what you're doing and like let's tweak and modify and just change slightly until we're getting better results out of it, and then we'll take a step back. Like what do you think is the tell? Like what kind of things are you considering and thinking about when people are asking for help as far as what kind of help to give?
Well, first and foremost, I'm thinking about how often they come to us asking for one thing and end up working through another, even
Okay.
if at first we choose a direction and start heading down that path. There's the old adage about turning over stones and finding snakes. I think
Mhm.
that happens pretty often when people are reevaluating their marketing strategy. But what comes to mind first is definitely going to be listening, asking a lot of questions about what's not working.
Mhm.
And then if they describe to me a lot of things about like, oh, we're getting low quality leads, we're not getting enough leads, we're not able to reach the right audience, that's going to talk to me more about strategy. But if they're coming to us and they're saying like, well, I don't even know where to pull this data from, and I don't understand why people are not able to use our website, or I'm not sure how we're going to get blog posts generated, that's usually more of a flag for me that the issue is process oriented or, like you're saying, tactic related, where we need to streamline and we need to make it more feasible for them to actually produce content and reach their audience, because it's not that the strategy or the messaging is necessarily off. It's that they're not able to make it through to the implementation for lack of time, other resources, whatever reason. So we don't even know if the strategy works because it hasn't been tested.
Mhm.
So I think that, you know, asking a lot of questions about, what is it that you wish you were seeing that you're not? What do you feel like you could be doing, but you haven't been able to? Or if you're working with an agency partner or somebody else already, what is it about that relationship that you feel like is not meeting the goal? And just trying to get a sense
Yeah.
of which direction their answers follow, because I think that in and of itself can be pretty telling about where they are.
Okay. And in the world where people don't know the answers to what we think are simple questions because we like live in it, right? Like
Mhm.
where does and and I don't know why the hell a non-marketing CEO would be watching this ever, right? But like, let's just take the scenario where there's a president type situation, right? Small to mid business. Maybe there's a marketing person in there, but the president knows something's wrong and also doesn't know the lingo, doesn't know where to look or how to think about it. Even if we're asking direct questions about it, you know, where would you go looking for them, knowing that they're not actually going to have the answers that we want them to give?
Well, yeah. Oh, it's a great question. So we're fortunate that, and me with my clients, I work with a number of CEOs or presidents or people who
Mhm.
are, at the top of the proverbial food chain at their company.
Mhm.
And more often than not, they just have no time. They're just so strapped for resources because they are, putting out fires, they're building the business, they want to be focused on development, they don't want to be dealing with marketing, which might feel more passive, feels like a
Mhm.
long-term investment, with questionable ROI depending on the initiative. So I'm generally going to start by looking at their website. I'm going to ask them what might be available in terms of surveys or reviews that they have. I'm going to ask them questions about presentations that they've given. Is there a PowerPoint? Is there a pitch deck I can see? Is there an email you've sent recently? Just
Mhm.
trying to get a perspective on what it is they're actually sending out to prospects now, even if it's really limited and it's just like a one-to-one email. That's something that I can look at and understand the language they're using, understand the value proposition, and try to
Mhm.
get a sense of, what are they selling people besides the product? What is the experience or the takeaway or the problem solve that they're trying to get across to people? And start there as my beginning point to get a sense of like, are you sure you're accurately projecting who you are and what you do? And can people understand that from this messaging?
Seems like something worth knowing.
Yeah.
Mhm. Um, so you spend a lot of time, I happen to know, working with brands who and companies, right, who are, maybe not the most sexy industries and companies and things like that. I mean, we're not We're not making our hay doing fucking logos for coffee shops or funnels for B2B SaaS companies or anything like that. But a lot of, some B2B in there. But, a lot of kind of what we've ended up working with seems like is companies updating and upgrading and moving from, in some cases, one century into another, but at least by decades in many cases, old school kind of traditional industry businesses, professional services, maybe some industrial with some other random things mixed in. But like that's obviously an important and ongoing process for those who have not yet converted to digital, whatever that might mean for anyone. But like as far as modernizing someone's marketing and assuming that they're in the environment that's I don't know, similar at least to Buffalo, where there's the old school players and there's the old ways of doing business and there's the sales driven, relationship driven network, just like work constantly because you're always going to networking shit and like being on boards and just like all that kind of shit. Like that's what's driving business. And now they're trying to like get leads and build a brand through this thing called the internet, right? So as someone's kind of like looking to do that, I'm curious about hearing from you times where, you've taken on specific kinds of upgrading or creation of new campaigns or trying new things for brands that maybe have existed for minutes. And, some things that have worked in your experience and some things maybe that necessarily haven't, knowing that like tips aren't a thing, right? There's no best practices here. Like whatever we're talking about in a given scenario for a particular kind of business in a particular situation does not inherently apply to anyone else. But I'm just kind of curious as you're thinking about it, as you're looking at bringing someone into a world they're uncomfortable with and unfamiliar with, while also trying to be effective and grow the success of their company, their marketing, their sales, etc. Like what have you come up against? What have you found to be useful? What have you found to be a dead end? Tell me a story.
Wow. So I think it's a really fun challenge to work with brands that, we'll call legacy brands, have been around
Mhm.
for a long time, have really built their reputation in more of a pen and paper handshake kind of world. And to then translate that into an online marketplace is just absolutely oversaturated with messaging at any given point. It's a really fun challenge to be able to maintain the through line of what made them build such a strong business in the brick and mortar world and carry that over into the online version. So, thinking about a client who's celebrating a 100-year anniversary and the way that we've been talking about, 100 years of manufacturing in Western New York and the way that, Rust Belt grit and determination is what got them through from day one to 100 years later. But then thinking about moving forward into a reality where they're identifying themselves as a global competitor. And so they're talking about like, well, it's not just Buffalo. It's not just this, born of the Rust Belt grit. It's like we are on par with our international competitors. We want to be forward thinking. We want to be tying that into our recruiting. Okay, well, that spurs an interesting conversation because recruiting is one of the most chronically online professions right now where people are finding themselves having to get increasingly creative because the competition is so fierce for people in the workforce. Now, that 100th anniversary campaign becomes an employer brand, which becomes something that has to take place on all new platforms that requires a completely different strategy. And I think what brands will find is that that legacy of long-term success, especially for these companies that are family-owned, still operated by family CEOs, it lends them credibility in a place where the person on the other end of that marketing messaging, so maybe in this case, the person who's hunting for a job, can also then look at your website, look at your content, look at your experiences over the last 100 years and say, like, this is a company I want to be part of. So I think it's not even just about translating what happens in the physical world into the online realm or changing tactics from, in-person meetings to things like webinars, but also being able to carry through what it is that made that company so special, that made people want to do business with them for so long up to this point.
Mm.
So I think that what works really well is getting to the authentic core, really focusing on that messaging about what makes that company so special to begin with. And then just making sure that you're continually referring back to that every time that you're designing a new campaign, and that everything is built on that same, ethos of how they became so strong to begin with.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, and I know we have this conversation pretty frequently internally, given what people come to us for, but the recruiting conversation and the marketing conversation, like, it's the same thing. Right. So it's just a different group of people who are trying to think, okay, yes, I want to do something with you for some period of time. And another thing I think they have in common now is that the advantage is no longer on the company side in the wild majority of cases, right? Like,
Mhm.
company, like marketing wise, we know and tell people all the time, everyone's scouting you before they ever make a contact with you that you'll be able to recognize and, like engage with them directly, right? They've looked at, numerous things. If you're B2B, probably like your LinkedIn, probably your website, a chunk of your website, and then at some point they follow you or send in a form or something, right? But they've done their work before they even bother talking to you. And same way with the job candidates. They've done the work. They can look to see whatever they want to look to see, even if they push in. And so the question is, are people positioned well enough to understand that, oh, this is a very different landscape? Like, this is no longer buyer beware, this is like a seller beware kind of a situation, because buyers have the powers, the candidates have all the power in the situations to engage or not. So, besides maybe like like sending through the message of, we've been here a long time in the case that you're talking about, right? Like, here's why we've been here a long time, and
Mhm.
therefore here's why you probably would want to come work with us, not just because we plan to stick around, right? But as far as, converting old message into updated message, right? And modified message, and then delivering it. The delivery of it and where you find it is obviously a much different than it was 50 years ago, and even 10. So, is there anything else, do you think, that's, I guess, recruiting, uh, building an employer brand, has in common with building just a a selling brand, I guess, is the other option if you're not an employer brand. But is there anything else you've seen? Because, this has popped up for a few of our clients that you think is useful for people to keep in mind who are trying to attract fucking customers or people to actually serve their customers.
Yeah, what's coming to mind for me is competition.
Mm.
So it's having a really good understanding of who your competitors are, not just in terms of which other brands are competing in the same space, whether it's
Mhm.
locally, nationally, whatever, but also, are you competing against a SaaS product? Are you competing against another big employer in a new sector where there's overlap for the people that you're trying to recruit? Are you competing against companies who are providing the same product but aligning themselves in a different space? Like maybe
Mhm.
it's a financial services product that now is leaning more into the fintech side. And so they're actually focusing more on the technology piece rather than the, fiduciary compliance and things like
Mhm.
that. I have found that that's something that's evolved even just in the last year or so, is that people have to relearn what a competitor might look like because of the decentralization of all of these different types of things that are available. It's when you're adapting that message, if your previous messaging was functioning under the assumption that you were just competing against another provider of your same service, which is another company run by human people, that
Mhm.
might be very different now, where some of your top competitors might be pieces of software.
Mhm.
or they might be recruiting agencies, or they might be, something that's different and kind of new on the scene in a way that is actually disruptive enough that it makes a difference for the way that you position yourself in the market.
Yep. Yeah, it might be just some other avenue altogether,
Yeah.
Um,
Or indifference, right? That's something we talk
yeah,
about a lot.
yes,
It's
yes,
like,
of
or
course.
are people in a situation where there's enough going on in this dumpster fire of a world right now that they just simply are not going to act because the problem's not severe enough, the consequences aren't scary enough, there's too many big things to deal with.
Mhm.
So it's a matter of making sure you're speaking to people with the understanding of the way things actually are in mind. And that ties into competition, but then also just the fact that we're selling to other human people who have thoughts and feelings and a lot going on.
Yeah. Just a bit here and
Just a
there.
little. Just a little
Uh,
existential dread as a treat.
the treats are what make it all worthwhile.
Right.
But yeah, so there's something there, and I think I forgot it for we got out there. But yeah, so being able to pull, that's what it was, being able to pull people out of inaction in sales has always been the thing, right? Inaction is always the number one competitor. It's always the number one reason for no. It's just like, yeah, no, I'm good.
Mhm.
And in recruiting, I think that's not been the case until recently, right? The assumption, the culture says one thing, but it's also held true that with a certain amount of scarcity in the world of work in buildings, in a certain amount of jobs, in a certain amount of places, and certain, like then there's enough scarcity involved where the only reason you're going to interact with a company about an open job is because like you need a fucking job, like, and we all know what happens if you don't have a job here. So you're ashamed. You're ashamed. That's what happens. Then some other functional shit, but
Gets
and
real dark
that's
real fast.
yes, exactly. And that's different now because some of the market, some of the newer parts of oh cool. Oh, I'm just gonna ask this. Fuck's sakes. Stop. Good. The world's gonna hear.
Oh, it's just a little
Uh,
snort.
it's so heartbroken. It's like I was right in the middle. Um,
It feels right. It feels right.
yeah, no, I think it fits here as we talk about the world and people. But yeah, so people who are looking might just be real casually looking. They are no way they're willing to have no job over top, overtaking one that's probably going to be shit or even staying in one that they already have. Inaction is losing there, right? People are quitting and leaving. So it's, like that is whereas that has never been a thing, I don't think. Maybe in headhunting level recruiting, right, where you really need to like yank people out of a position that they're comfortable in. But like now that's the case with the general market. And especially things that don't have, like here's 16 years of fucking particular school you have to go to or something, because there's that opportunity and there's a lot of other opportunities that are pretty low barrier to entry. And like what those barriers are shifting and they can change with the right candidate. So, in that world, yeah, I think that there's probably more required to not only win people over from your similar company style competition, but yeah, like getting people to like just stick in the freaking interview process and come through and then sell them and keep the promises that you made along the way, which ultimately is where a lot of companies fail. Let's be honest. We can all promise wonderful things, but you're not really a family member. So you're a fucking asset or not. So yeah, is there anything that like you want to speak to as far as how that's different and anything else about what people can do to kind of give their recruiting and their attraction of potential workers a boost?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. So first is just an awareness that, especially in industries like financial services or like manufacturing, where there is just unbelievably high competition for roles, especially those that require similar credentials, whether that's a certain degree path or none at all. It's like
Mhm.
the group that you are seeking, people are reaching them earlier and earlier. So, that might mean speaking with college classes. That might mean going to job fairs. That might mean advertising with the 4-H club or, with other youth groups that are geared towards kids who are going to go on to careers that are relevant to what your client is looking for. So it's having an awareness that it's not enough any longer to just put out a help wanted ad, the equivalent on Indeed these days. You'll get a lot of applicants, but a lot of them will not be qualified. A lot of them will not have relevant experience, or they might not even have related interests. That's something that I hear from clients too, is like, oh, well, I'm willing to give people a chance, but I want to see that they've got at least some interest in what we have going on here. And it's like, well, okay, but nowadays, because people are so aware that it's an employee's market, they're applying for whatever seems interesting, and then you're going to have to parse through as the employer whether or not there's any overlap there, and that can be really difficult. But so part of the reason people are trying to reach younger and younger prospective job seekers is to try to plant that seed earlier on to try and kind of create like an interest in what we have going on here and eventually wanting to work for this company. But, even just the workforce at large, and especially as people's minds start to change around things like unions, and around workers' rights and around work-life balance, we saw so much shifting in the pandemic. And I'm not a recruiter. This is just observed by way of trying to reach people for jobs,
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big part of it. The other thing is exactly what you said about people keeping their promises. So I've noticed that we've been getting more traction where people have information about what happens after they get hired. So even if it's a job posting, saying like, hey, come work with us, people are kind of apprehensive of like, oh, well, you'll get me in and then what?
Yeah.
What is my experience going to be like when I get there? So especially for our manufacturing clients, I've started including information about what that onboarding process is going to look like, especially if we're telling people that it's a job that doesn't require experience, because we want to make sure that there's an understanding of like, yes, we know you're going to be coming in. We know you're the equivalent of a newborn baby, and we're going to make sure that you have the supports in place to be successful.
Yeah.
Because that's a common barrier to entry for folks who are maybe transitioning from a different type of employment or who are coming into the workforce for the first time or after a long gap in their experience. They want to know that you've thought about it is the simplest way to describe it. And they want to know that there's some place for them to land once they get in there and get through their initial onboarding.
Yeah. Yeah, which makes sense, especially for the lack of experience type folks, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, the baby needs to be trained before you put it out to work at the mill.
Exactly.
In this child labor analogy
Yeah.
that we've now worked into. But like, yeah, they want to know that there's a reason that they're set up, because wants to waste another, month, 2 months, 3 months, by the time you're just so miserable, then you're just out and you just realize
Exactly.
you just like sunk all that time in. And companies obviously don't either. So better to set people up and then have all your expectations lined up, generally, one would think. And I think worth noting, right, then there's an eye to the future that has a lot to do with all the stuff you talked about, which sure, and I know some of the examples you're pulling from, right? I mean, they're 100-year-old companies and stuff like that. And so they've got an eye to the future because they've looked longevity to extend it. And it's not just some bullshit projection of the future. It's just like, no, here's a future. And so you'd actually have to be thinking about 5 and 10 years out, which is difficult and not my specialty, certainly.
Yeah.
But somebody should, who's leading a business, so should be thinking out. And if you're that stable to be thinking that far, then like you have a different opportunity than someone who's fresh or brand new, who's like, yeah, sure, they're wondering if they're going to get what you promised. Like, will you even exist in 6 weeks, right?
Right.
Like, cool looking startup, bro. But like, will I be employed anywhere in 2 months when your funding's out? So, shit, just got like the office flashbacks happening in my head too for the search episode after Michael leaves and then 3 people fall through and they do all
Yeah.
the interviewing and they bring all the guest stars in, and just thinking about all that and how some of that's still relevant. What the fuck is it? The Everybody Loves Raymond, his character in it, who like blows his whole interview on purpose because
Yeah.
he in the elevator ride works up the like, oh, but if I say yes, once I'm in, I'm going to stay here. I'm never going to be able to leave, and like projects this awful future and then blows the interview. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's that will stop people, right? Like that's
Yep.
a real life thing. Like once I'm in here, am I going to want to get the hell back out again? Probably not. So let me just find something I actually want to settle into.
And isn't it because Robert California is in the elevator with him or
Yeah,
something? He's
because
like, oh, this
California
company's a
fucks with
mess.
him. He's like, yeah, these people are dead up there. Like, yeah,
Right. Well, and that's a whole other thing about like Glassdoor ratings, LinkedIn reviews. Employer brands are extremely public nowadays,
yes,
and it is not hard at all to find out if there have been any kind of labor issues at a company, which, fortunately, I haven't had to do a ton of management around that just
yeah,
by virtue of the clients we work with. We've been privileged to not have to deal with a whole lot of
that's
that.
good.
But
Yes.
um, it also works on the flip side where it's like you also really want to see employees going out of their way to say nice things about your company. Again, talk about indifference being the motivator. Like if people
Mhm.
are just like, yeah, this job's all right, it pays my bills, like they're probably not really going to say anything bad, but they're also probably not really going to say anything good.
Yeah.
So if you can get an employee to offer a testimonial or participate in one of those best places to work or do some kind of team building thing, that goes a long way, I think, as well, because they project that the company takes care of you as a whole person and not
Hmm.
necessarily just as another, cog in the machine, which is a funny pun for manufacturing jobs. But
Yes.
just thinking about campaigns that we've run where people will comment and say like, "Oh, I retired from there a few years ago, but I had a great experience," or my son works there and he loves it and is having a great
Hmm.
time getting started. Like that kind of stuff, I think is also really useful. And so even if you're not just focused on making sure you're not having bad reviews hanging out there, generating good ones is almost harder and maybe even has better payoff. So
Mm.
it's something to be thinking about in terms of like often people will come to us and say like, "Oh, I have one bad Google review. What should I do about that?" And the answer is, I don't know, probably nothing because
Yeah.
it's old, it's not relevant, it's someone that never works there, whatever. You can respond to it, but then just let it go and instead focus on trying to generate those positive reviews. And if no one's
Mhm.
willing to leave a review, that's something to think about as well. So
Yes. There's a campaign for that.
yeah, right.
Um, luckily, there's a campaign for everything.
Yeah. And then,
So,
to your point about thinking about the future and what expansion may or may not look like if you are a smaller company or newer, or it's a relatively new line of business, or, any of those other scenarios that we come across, I think it's really important for people to be realistic about how much they can achieve with the resources that they have available, whether that's the number of people, the number of hours, the number of dollars. I think sometimes what happens is they, don't want to hire anyone and then they're not able to achieve any of the goals they set out because they're just constantly putting out fires instead of being able to think strategically. Or on
mhm.
the flip side, they might become over leveraged and hire too many people and now the roles are unclear, the strategy wasn't set, the tactics weren't defined, and so now everyone's kind of looking at each other. It's the Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing and no one's exactly sure how to execute.
Yeah.
So I think it can be really tricky for companies that are either startups or they're, starting a new line of business, which is something I'm working through with a client right now, just trying to get their head around what's realistic and what's right size so that you're not over investing, but you're also making enough impact with the strategy that you've worked so hard to set.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay. Enough on recruiting. Um, let's change tone. Now I'm going to bounce around a little bit. So, in the world of, well, what do you wish you've come on here to Renoun and started working with clients that were already here. You've been here as certain clients started, right? You've seen like the different spots of the folks who've been working with us or an agency, right, for years and years, and then some people who also have worked with other agencies and have been burned, and there are certain sensitivities. And then there are people who are just kind of coming in fresh, and this is their first experience, right? So, regardless, because I think most businesses will fall in the first two camps, right? They're either working with people and it's going well, or they've worked with people and they've gotten burned because it happens, right? But thinking about what they're coming from and what someone who's coming at it with no knowledge whatsoever or experience, what's one thing that you wish you could make crystal clear to people about what it's like to work with an agency, what to expect out of working an agency, like what the secret sauce is, right? Like if you could just get one thing, and even if you could like wave the fucking wand and they would actually like get it fully, not just like an idea to understand, but then they would actually do the thing. Like, what's the one thing you wish you could impart to potential clients from the agency perspective?
It's gonna take more than you think.
Okay.
More time, more energy, more money. And I don't say that because I feel like agencies are, power hungry, money hungry, trying to zap people for all of this value. But it's like people very often want complex problems solved, and they approach us not having any groundwork laid whatsoever. And so what that means is we are going to need a lot of communication up front. Or if you don't have time or energy or whatever resource to give us that communication, well, we're going to need more budget because we're going to need to be doing more of that research on our own. Or, if you're not able to be responsive to questions, especially in the beginning, we might then start working down a path that isn't as great as it could have been because we haven't been working as collaboratively from day one. I would say that our most successful client relationships, whether they're someone who starts with us, as their first advertising agency engagement, or if they've come to us because they had a bad experience in the past, are instances where people will prioritize time in their schedule to work with us directly. So whether that's a standing meeting, whether that's being responsive to emails, whether that's, increasing budget during certain months of the year because they know that they have trade shows and, drip campaigns and all these other things that need to be running at that time. It's really just about that understanding going into it, that you're not going to just have one meeting with us and then we're going to solve everything and then we're going to serve you up leads because that's never how it works.
Come on, though.
And I think that there's frustration that comes from that because it's a misunderstanding. And I think that if you're speaking to an agency who tells you that is how it's going to work, that would be an immediate red flag for me. And I would say that you should push back on that and question it because there's nothing that we can promise. It's all going to be iterative. It's all going to be evolving over time. I mean, I think the greatest thing about some of the clients I've been working with for almost 2 years now is seeing the ways that their businesses have grown and evolved. And we've been able to adapt and create new strategies and create new campaigns and just continuously be putting out new things. And then I also learn more about their businesses over time, and I'm coming to them with these great ideas of like, oh, I saw this article in the news, and I remember just last week we talked about this. So is that something that we should, put out messaging about? So it really builds and gets better over time, which to me just doubles down on that notion of like, it's going to take more. And so I hope that people hear that and it comes across as saying like it takes more collaboration. It doesn't just take, I don't think it's a good fit for anybody if all you're doing is pouring money in and getting no results because that's not fun for me either,
No.
I never want that to be the case. If anything, I find myself caring a little too much about what's going on with my client accounts. And again, some of that comes from the knowledge that a couple of my longest standing clients have come from other agencies where they felt like they weren't being respected or weren't being treated with enough care. And that's something that I never want them to experience from me. So I go out of my way to make sure I'm responsive. If they're going to make the time for me, I'm going to make the time for them. I do my best to catch errors or, make suggestions or give ideas as they come up instead of just waiting for a meeting. So I think, I don't know, this is a very long-winded version of the question you asked, but it takes more than people think from both sides.
Yes. Doesn't it ever? Every time. So, and then, yeah, I care too much. I work too long. It sounds like a strengths and weaknesses riff from The Office as well. So,
Oh, no.
on that note, your comfort content is what? And what have you learned from that content that you've been able to apply? Whether as in general in work, or to a specific aspect of work. And while you think about that, we'll take a moment to hear a word from our sponsor, Renoun Creative.
Is it BetterHelp? Oh, well, the honest answer is right now my comfort content is scrolling TikTok just as a way to dissociate.
Yeah,
Which on one hand is, an absolute cultural juggernaut right now and is completely shifting the way that people interact with one another, in my opinion, more so than any other social media platform in the last decade. So
hmm
it's been a fascinating social experiment. Is that why I'm engaging with it? Not really.
totally. Yeah, it's for science. Yeah.
It's to stay relevant. No, it's for the dancing videos, but I like that. I read a lot, but I don't always read, like business related books.
Yeah.
I like to read a mix of a bunch of different things just to kind of keep my perspective broad. But then at the same time, I do always have my copy of Influence nearby.
Oh shit. Classics.
So, I think what I like about reading a bunch of different genres is the same thing I like about working with a bunch of different clients, which is just that it engages my mind in different ways every time. And so
Mhm.
I'm not, I don't know if there's one specific thing I can point to and say I've learned, but it's more just about like a depth of interest in a whole bunch of stuff, you
Yeah.
know?
It's just similar, right? Like
Yeah.
what works for you in your own world works for you in your work.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
then, I'm a diehard Parks and Rec fan. And I would like to think that I've carried a little bit of Leslie Knope into my work.
Yes. Yeah. I hope you sleep more.
Yeah, I do.
I know. Um, hmm. Okay. So then tell me about Ride for Roswell.
Oh, Ride for Roswell. So I have been riding, this will be my 12th year. I ride in memory of my late grandfather, Dave Oldman, who passed away from pancreatic cancer. He was treated at Roswell Park, and, unfortunately, just not everybody gets a good outcome. So the Ride for Roswell is something I started doing to fight that feeling of like, oh, but I've got to do something. I just want to do something. You
Hmm
experience a loss like that, and it leaves this kind of emptiness in your life that you just want to reach out to other people who've had the same experience.
hmm
So the first year I did it, I rode 45 miles on a single speed bike. I didn't train at all. I had no idea what I was getting into. And I pulled over halfway and called my mom.
Wow.
And I was like, what am I doing? And anyway, I've been doing it for a decade since.
Got over it. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've raised over $30,000. I've done a century ride, it's a 100-mile ride. This year I'm going to be doing less mileage, but the mission is, just as important to me. It's something that I think is so truly unique in Western New York, and unfortunately, so many of us have had interactions with cancer in one way or another, whether it's yourself or someone you know, or
hmm
anyone in your sphere. So I love that it connects me to the city, to people who have also experienced that kind of loss or just, stress of dealing with a cancer diagnosis. And I love to ride my bike, and so did my grandfather. So it's really just perfect.
Nice. Nice. Donate below.
Yeah, right. Search Nicole Cooke on rideforroswell.org.
Need a card to drop in. Make a note. I'd never make notes.
Yeah, right.
All right.
Sometimes I
So
have clients who, in our podcast recordings, will talk to me. Like they'll be recording and they'll be like, "Oh, Nicole, cut that out." And I love it. It makes me laugh.
that's
I
I
love
don't
thinking
want
that
to.
I'm guiding them through their recording, even though I'm
Yeah,
not
that's
on the
good.
video.
You're in their head, not just in their phone. Uh, so let's. All right. So the repeater question, something I've asked everyone who's been on the pod so far, some version of, and your particular version of what you think is the biggest or most important marketing myth that you would like to see blown up, that if it were blown up, unlearned, let go of, whatever, people, at least the people you've been working with, would be doing a lot better with modernizing and improving their marketing and growth efforts.
I think the most toxic myth is that you need to be doing everything all at once. Just because all of the platforms are out there doesn't mean you need to be on every single one. And I am a firm believer that you're better off leveraging fewer of them in a better, stronger, more strategic way than
Hmm
just lightly touching every single one of them. Because it's not going to be helpful if people can find you everywhere, but can't understand anything about the value you're trying to provide. So I think that for me, and also it just causes a lot of unnecessary stress and strain on people who are engaging in the marketing activities. Like we can tee up clients and say, yeah, for your social, sure, here's 6 platforms you can be posting on upwards of once a day. Oh, and don't forget to interact with all those comments. Oh, and make sure the content is compelling and make sure you're driving traffic and it's like,
Yeah.
I just feel my heart rate going up, let alone for somebody who doesn't sit in this stuff every day and you have to get
Mhm.
on and figure out how those platforms work, or you're leveraging all of this budget for that, and it's like, or we can just focus on getting really good at LinkedIn.
Mhm.
And there's a good chance that that's going to play out better, especially if you're trying to develop some really strong and consistent messaging
Yeah.
than just trying to be everywhere all at once.
I like that one.
Okay. Trying to choose just one is difficult, but I think in my mind that's the
Yeah.
focus because and
Yeah.
especially because marketing is so publicly available. And I guess I mean that in the sense of like you can Google how to market my business and it's going to give you 50 responses of like, oh, you should be doing SEO and paid ads and social media and podcast guesting and you should write content for your local publication and you should be involved in all these trade groups. And it's like an endless list of
Yeah.
just nonstop stuff. And so people read that and they take it to heart and they think, oh my gosh, I have to be doing all of this, everything
Mhm.
right now, today. And
Yeah.
then that's how we get back into the conversation of like, sure, we can do that, but it's going to take a lot more than you think.
Yes. And likely more than you have.
Yeah, or want or
Yeah.
need and that's the point is it's like you don't have to do all of that. You
Yeah.
don't have to do all of that. You can just
Yeah.
do a few things really well and get through to people with really great messaging and be very strategic about reaching your audience where they are looking for you, and that's
Mhm.
enough. And
Mhm.
if you're providing the value you say you are, right?
Yeah.
Talk about follow through. Not just for employers, but also for people and their clients,
Mhm.
providing that follow through and generating rave reviews, then that's going to be enough.
Cool. Trying to always think of what mine would be, and I can never settle on one. That's why I just like other people to give me there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of bad lessons still in people's way, which happens with everything, I think. Actually, you know what? I think mine is uh I can do that.
Yeah, that's another one.
That's the biggest, like, and outside of the time and the capacity constraints, like the idea that if they did have time or if they wanted to, they could whatever fill in the fucking blank, and especially where it's like designing or writing, and the fact that AI has allowed more people now, or what they call AI has allowed more people to like say like, oh yeah, no, I could do that, right? So once I just let AI write it and then I just change it a little bit, then it's just like, yeah, except AI is dumb. You're a worse writer than AI is, and your perspective is wrong. As far as where you're coming from, you're too close to your own, and so it's like it's bad, right? I can do that. Salespeople writing marketing emails, I can
Yep.
do that. Like, no, you don't know what the
Mhm.
fucking point is. Like every line here has a fucking point, and you've just given 50 bullets about yourself and your expertise and why people should do business with you and ask for a fucking meeting after an email nobody would ever read.
Yep. It's
So
a
yeah,
very fast way to degrade your brand. You spend
yes.
all of this time and energy building such a strong foundation, and then you start putting out stuff that's good enough. Oh, it's
Hmm.
AI. I have the tools. I can do whatever. It's like, yeah, I guess, but it will very quickly negate the initial investment that you made in building such a strong brand in the first place, because now the images don't look quite right, or the tone of the copy is all over the place, or people who also use ChatGPT can immediately tell that that's what you did.
I've read
Ugh.
this phrase somewhere before.
Yes.
Yes.
As we delve into this conversation, it's just that's one of the things that's disappointing to me. And I struggle with it a little bit because I don't want to give people the impression that I don't think they can do things. So what I hear a lot, especially because many of these legacy brands that we work with, they have people who work there who are older
Yeah.
and they're not digital native, they're not marketing experts, they're not immersed in this stuff the way that we are. And they'll say to me like, "Oh, you think I can't do LinkedIn just because I'm older?" And it's
Hmm.
like, "Well, no, absolutely not." But I don't want to confuse posting on LinkedIn in your own voice with setting a strategy for your entire brand.
Yeah.
And that I think is something really important to call out is it's like, yeah, of course, let's work together, set a strategy, create your content pillars, work through all of the stuff that we know clients want to hear about, and then you go off and in your own voice, write these posts and get that value across. But I don't think it's the same thing for you to say, oh, well, if I had a couple hours, I too could sit down and write this entire strategy because it's like,
Yeah.
well, we're having two different conversations here. So
Hmm.
I feel like I
Hmm.
walk that line a lot where I'm trying to convey to people like, yeah, of course, I believe in you to execute what we've built. I think that you'll do a great job getting this out there. I think people really want to hear what you have to say. And I think you should stick to the plan that we developed because I don't think it's a good idea for you to go on ChatGPT and have it write 10 LinkedIn posts for you. And now everybody can tell that they were robot generated and now they don't want anything to do with your profile anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's a fine line.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's less of a fine line, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to manage clients. So for you, it's much finer than it is for me. Mine's a pretty clear, like, no, you couldn't. And almost every possible equation is like, oh, you could, but the implication is I could do that as good as you or some professional can.
Right.
And that's the part that's just like, no, you can't. I assure you. Like I've read it or I've seen it, and or everyone knows that. Nobody says that shit to doctors, or even like really anyone, plumbers, like
Yeah.
service staff.
Well, even the clients, right? I mean, the clients
Yeah.
that we serve at Renoun, like they do very high level, very very complex things every day that I don't
Mhm.
pretend I could just jump in and start doing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I couldn't just start jumping into the complex topics that they have to work through with clients with, generally speaking, pretty severe ramifications if they get it wrong, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
like, well, okay, we're also trying to protect you from getting involved in lawsuits related to your website or discrimination issues in your recruiting efforts or, all of
Yeah.
these things that they might not have any context for. But just because you can go on ChatGPT and write a job post, you feel like you can then execute an entire campaign. Like, I don't know. It's just a disconnect for me and
Yeah.
it's kind of
Or like
annoying.
at one point, randomly, you thought of something that could have been a tagline. And
Yeah.
given that there's 70 billion of them in the world and most of them are terrible, like that's correct. But then repeat that, right? Now
Yeah.
repeat it again, and do that. And please God, don't design your own website. So yes, we've seen the horrors. We've seen the horrors that come from that. Okay. Anything else that you want to say, pitch, ask? This is your moment to say whatever you want to say before we wrap this shit up.
I think we, like many of our clients, have people come to us when they find themselves at some kind of inflection point where they're being kind of forced into action, whether it's like their current website stopped working, they had some terrible experience with their current agency, they have some huge opportunity that they want to jump on and now need somebody to support them in getting, thousands of dollars worth of Google ads, whatever it is. I would say that if you want a meaningful relationship with an ad agency, you want someone that can actually come in, function as a partner, give great advice, continue to work together with your brand in the long term.
Mhm.
It's better to go into it viewing it as a long-term commitment and not just thinking about it. This is related to the point of people assuming like, oh, I could do that. And so therefore it must be pretty easy. And so I'm just going to hire you to come in and execute. That's not going to be a great situation for either party. And
Mhm.
that's something I think about a lot because I see clients who come in who want us to, it's usually that executing on an opportunity where they say, for whatever reason, I've been working on this website for months and the old agency couldn't get it over the line. And now I've got a deadline in front of me because I have a trade show, right?
Mhm.
It's like, yes, great. I wish you hadn't waited the extra 3 months to make the decision that this wasn't working.
Yeah.
um, so it's a little bit of a combination of what I'm thinking in terms of like your brand deserves to be treated with respect, and we can't necessarily create something that is up to the standards of your brand if we have not been given the appropriate runway and the appropriate resources to make it happen.
Mhm.
So I would encourage anybody who's at a point where they feel like maybe you don't need marketing right now, but you're going to need support in the future. Or maybe you're looking at your brand and you're just like, oh, I'm embarrassed to wear my own shirt to events because I don't like this logo. When you start getting that feeling in the back of your mind that something's not right, it's a good time to reach out and get the conversation started rather than waiting until there's some, oh no, I have to do this thing right now moment, because then nobody's going to be in a great situation to support you as best as they could have without additional time and energy.
Yes. Well said.
Thanks.
And the honest folks will tell you that at that part, right?
Yeah.
The honest agencies will be like, yes, well, then here's what it's going to take to actually solve your problem, and it's not ideal. But then some folks will sell the easy solution, which is why some folks expect that.
Mhm.
To be fair to the businesses, agencies have been bullshitting people. Lead gen agencies bullshit me every day in my inbox
Yeah.
about what's possible without knowing anything from day one on. So no, there's bad expectations set out there, and I think we've done some good work to hopefully correct some of them.
Yeah, I like to think so. Again, the number of clients we have that come to Renoun after having had a bad experience somewhere else and then stay for years, I hope that
Yep.
speaks for itself and that people are, genuinely having a different experience with us than they did somewhere else. And I hope that we continue to see more of that, people having
Yep.
a great time.
Woo! Woo!
That
And
was weird, but I think if that's the part we have to cut out, then so be it.
nah, nothing's getting cut. All this is in. Marcus licking himself. Nothing gets cut from here. This
That
is
was really funny. I feel like that needs to be a teaser clip.
yeah. He's laying in shame now. He's like, what if you just took me outside instead of like mocking me in front of others? All right,
Yeah.
cool. Well, yeah, I think besides whatever we're gonna cut, add, splice back into it, I think that covers it for the conversation. So appreciate the time. And do you want anyone to look at anything or look for you anywhere? Where do they find you? How do they reach you?
Yeah, people can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not as active as I should be. I'm the first to admit it, but I'm there. I do check it all the time. Otherwise, you can visit the Renoun website, Google me,
Yeah.
make it more fun. Find me on all the socials. I'm
Yeah.
everywhere.
There are some different Nicole Cooks though, so let's just make sure that you're on the right one.
There are, and one is an Olympic cyclist,
Oh,
which is really unfortunate for me.
interesting. Yeah, no, that's a direct like yeah, no, I just know one. It's a different spelling of Nicole, but who I just know from I think Intersection Cafe or something. And so I
Mm.
see on Instagram. Sometimes I see two Nicole Cooks on Instagram. Like, oh.
Yeah, no, catch me at the Ride for Roswell party pace and the 10-mile route.
Yeah, there you go. Jello shots.
Yeah.
There you go. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on. And well, I'm sure we will talk soon enough.
I guess,
Fine.
if I must.
Thanks for checking out Blowing Up Brands, brought to you by Renoun Creative. If you dig what we're putting out, follow us on YouTube and your favorite pod platform and at renowncreative.com. See you soon.